Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the Complex Trauma Training Center. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. If you're a mental health professional working with complex trauma and are interested in learning the neuroaffective relational model, we're excited to share with you about our upcoming NARM therapist trainings. The NARM therapist training is an advanced clinical training designed for licensed mental health professionals, current mental health graduate students, and active clinical interns and trainees, where you will get trained in a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach for resolving the long-term impacts of ACEs and CPTSD. As you are learning and integrating NARM, you will receive individualized support from a team of skilled, passionate, and supportive trainers led by faculty members Brad Kammer, Stephanie Klein, and Marsha Black. If you are working in the field of complex trauma, we encourage you to register now to get trained in NARM. For more information and to reserve your spot, please visit www.complextraumatrainingcenter.com. Today's guest is Dr. Nadine Macaluso. At the age of 22, Nadine's life took an unexpected turn when she married Jordan Belfort, the infamous stockbroker immortalized in the Hollywood hit The Wolf of Wall Street. Initially, their union seemed like a modern-day fairy tale, but beneath the surface, a dark reality began to unfold. As their bond tightened, Jordan's facade crumbled, revealing a complex web of infidelity, narcissistic abuse, greed, and a devastating drug addiction that transformed Nadine's dream into a nightmare. Fueled by her determination to help others facing similar struggles, Nadine pursued a path of healing and transformation. She received her master's degree in counseling and a Ph.D. in somatic psychotherapy. Dr. Nade's work is informed by the NARM model, and she carries a strong emotional and relational intelligence as she supports individuals struggling to map their own journey and overcome self-doubt. In Nadine's new book, Run Like Hell, A Therapist's Guide to Recognizing, Escaping, and Healing from Trauma Bonds, she shares her personal narrative and the wealth of knowledge that grew out of healing from the terror and trauma she experienced. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Nadine Macaluso. All right, I'm here with Dr. Nadine Macaluso. It is so good to have you here with us on Transforming Trauma.
I'm so happy to be here. It's so nice to visit with you again.
Yeah, I was so excited that you agreed to come back. There's so much to talk about, which we'll get into. And I would like to start by asking you what it is that you would like listeners to get out of our time together today.
What I would like listeners to get out of our time is to really understand, we hear this word trauma bond thrown around so much in the zeitgeist, and for people to really understand what it is and the seriousness of it is and how many people it affects. And then, of course, transforming trauma, how to heal.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So we had you back. It's been a couple years. You've written a new book. And this is a really full kind of all the details are in here.
Yes.
And so I'm really curious if we could start with, what caused you to write the book? Where are you coming from? Let's start there.
What caused me to write the book was, it's interesting. As a therapist, I never really wanted to have per se a specialty. I mean, I was one of those people that really, for some reason, was resistant to it. And then it's what we're resistant to ends up happening. And what happened was that in my clinical practice, I was seeing so many smart, kind, beautiful women/people come into my office in these toxic, dysfunctional, abusive relationships. And so it was just a never-ending stream of people coming in. And a lot of times, they would come in with anxiety or depression, which of course can be caused from early developmental trauma. But a lot of it was from the trauma that they were experiencing today in their own adult relationships. And so like a true academic that I am, I was like, I got to figure this out. And so I went back to the research and started to do a lot of research about trauma bonds, about pathological love, about pathological people, the dynamics of it, and just dove right in to get answers for my patients.
Now, you had named the book, I think the first iteration was Trauma Bond Free, correct?
Yes.
And you've changed the name.
Yeah, so the new name of the book is called Run Like Hell, A Therapist's Guide to Recognizing, Escaping, and Healing from Trauma Bonds.
I love it. I love it.
Catchy title, Run Like Hell. Because
Yeah.
usually, when you're in a relationship like that and you would just talk to a friend about it, they'd say, run, get out of that. So that's why we decided to do that title.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell us, I don't want to give too many spoilers here, but in the book, you share your experience being married to Jordan. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what took you from exiting that marriage and getting into the field.
Yeah. So, my first marriage to the Wolf of Wall Street, whether I like it or not, has become well known. And I'm 56 now. And when I had married him, I was 22. And our relationship was fast and furious. There was a lot of love bombing in the beginning. But then, as I discuss what happens in a trauma bond, originally the partner can start very charming and loving and kind and generous and helpful. Then, as I say, the mask falls and they become controlling and abusive and manipulative. And so back then, when I experienced that, I was married to him for about 8 years. Nobody was talking about trauma bonds. Nobody was talking about narcissistic abuse. Nobody was really talking about pathological personalities at all. Even my own therapist back then wasn't talking about it. But I was able to get out of that marriage. And hence, at 39, I went back to school to become a therapist because I knew that therapy had helped me so much during that marriage. And then he wrote a book and made a movie. But even through this whole experience, I never really thought again that, when you're a little girl, you don't grow up and say, when I'm younger, I want to be a trauma bond whisperer. It's nothing that I really aspired to. But again, my own personal experience combined with my clinical work is what really fueled this deep exploration into this toxic relationship, and not from a pop psychology lens, but from a real academic scholarly lens.
Yeah.
So look at this whole phenomena from a scholarly lens, and because really in a trauma bond, there's really an abuse of power that happens. And I'll go into the two conditions of a trauma bond. But it wasn't just my own personal experience. It wasn't just my clinical practice. We were seeing it in society.
Mm-hmm.
Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, the Boy Scout leaders abusing their power, the priests abusing their power, right? So we're seeing it on every single level. I experienced it personally, seeing it in my room, and then seeing it in the big cultural milieu.
Yeah. You mentioned love bombing a little earlier. Can you tell listeners, in case they're not familiar with that term, what love bombing is?
Yeah, so love bombing is a red flag in a trauma bond, and it's a very tricky one because it's initially when someone gives you intense admiration, affection, and love, and it feels really good. And they'll use promises forever after 2 weeks. You're my soulmate. We're going to be forever. We're two peas in a pod. There's constant calling and texting and this need for communication. And again, initially, and especially for me as a young girl, and even for a lot of my patients, it feels good to be love bombed. But I have a saying that if it feels too good to be true, it probably is.
I'm curious if you can share, for anyone who might be listening who's wondering, is that what I experienced or is that what's happening right now? Because you said it feels good.
Yeah.
I'm curious, have you noticed with your patients
Yeah.
themes of maybe what they're experiencing that would cause them to maybe not see what that is in the very beginning?
Well, yeah, and I think the love bombing is a good red flag, and it's also a good distraction for the person who's in the perpetrator in the trauma bonds to kind of really hide what's going on with them behind their mask. And so it can be someone that seems very generous and helpful, always there to help you, always there to get your animal food, always dropping by, constant calling, constant texting. They need a constant communication initially. And there's a real feeling of kind of almost like they've come to save you, or like fairy tale, like someday my prince will come. But, there's no princes coming. So it's just this larger than life experience of love. initially that you can't really love somebody after 2 weeks. You don't know if they're your soulmate after 2 weeks, but this person is really wanting you to have that experience.
Hmm. Okay. So, and then you mentioned what you call the mask falling off. What's that like?
Yeah. So in a trauma bonds, and I write about this, is that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. So initially, there is this charming, loving, generous, helpful individual that enters your life. But then over time, what happens is that the mask falls and you begin to notice that their words aren't matching their actions.
Mm.
You begin to notice that they start to become very controlling of you and your behaviors and what you're doing. Or you start to notice that they become manipulative or deceitful. So you just start to see that they become a very different person than what you initially experienced with them. They can become intimidating, dominating, threatening, right? So you'll be shocked, almost like whiplashed, like,
Hmm.
wait, this is not the person who I thought. It's a
Yeah.
very different experience than initially what you experienced.
Okay, so in the beginning, what you describe is they do show up. Their words do match their actions. They are very generous, and it seems very genuine. And then the mask falls, and you start feeling sort of the split of like, wait a second, they're saying one thing, but what they're doing is not matching up.
Right. And so there are two conditions that are required for a trauma bond to exist. And the first one is intermittent abuse.
Mm.
And that's what you start to experience, where 70% of the time after the trauma bond has gone on, they really start to be controlling, cruel, dominating, manipulative, betraying. And then now they're only about nice, kind, gentle, helpful, loving, and warm 30% of the time. And
Mm.
what the research showed, I was excited when I saw this research because it really validated the woman's confusion, is that animal trainers who use a mix of love and cruelty, the animals bond to them 230% more
Oh,
than
wow.
straight love and kindness.
Oh, wow. Because
Yeah.
they're so like just waiting for the moment when the trainer will be kind to them. So they're just,
Yeah. So it
wow.
creates the bond. And the person that actually is being cruel to you then really also becomes your soother.
Mhm.
You're very dependent upon them becoming your soother. And so that's why when people say, oh, why does she stay? Or, just leave already. But time over time, that experience of intermittent abuse really reinforces the bond. That's
Yeah.
actually what makes it happen.
Yeah, and that was actually my very next question is for anyone who's like, why would someone stay in a situation like that where they're being abused or someone's words aren't matching up? Everyone would like to think that they would step out of that situation. And what you're describing is that the way that they interact is actually what creates the very bond that keeps them there.
Exactly. And then because of the intermittent abuse or intermittent reinforcement, there's always that hope that they'll go back to being the way they were initially.
Mhm.
We say hope is the hook.
Mhm.
So that's the first condition that needs to exist. And then the second one is a power imbalance.
Mhm.
And a power imbalance can occur due to many reasons. It could be that the person has more resources than the other partner. It can also just be simply just because the fact that we love somebody, they have power over us and they can abuse and exploit that. Or people gain power over others by being intimidating, dominating, and threatening. And then the
Mm.
person fears them. And so the power imbalance is the other condition that allows the trauma bond to persist.
Yeah. So in the book, the very title, like you said, Run Like Hell, a therapist's guide to recognizing, escaping, and healing. So that seems kind of there's an order there. First recognizing. So you're giving us some terms here, understanding what love bombing is, understanding what the trauma bond itself is. What else would someone need to recognize?
They would also need to, so that there are ways that this is done too. A lot of times, initially, you'll notice that the perpetrator will use twinning. Like initially, when you meet them, oh, I love sushi. You love sushi. I love tennis. I love tennis. They start to match everything that you like. Is another way to deepen the bond.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's another trick that they'll use. And so another thing that I really talk about so that you can recognize this relationship is in the trauma bond, I do not call the perpetrator a narcissist because the person is much more than a narcissist. And the second chapter titled, Is He Twisted or Tender? I go into describe the personality of I call them a pathological lover.
Mm. Okay, say more about that. Talk to us about the personality of the perpetrator.
Pathological means mentally unwell. And so the very simple way, I'll start simple, then we'll go deep. The very simple way that I describe somebody, this pathological lover, is this is a person who will use, exploit, betray, and harm their lover to get their needs met for money, power, pleasure, and status. And so to me, anybody who does that is mentally unwell because I don't use people as a means to an end. You don't use, but they have a very complicated psychological makeup. They usually have a cluster B personality disorder.
Okay, tell us what that is.
So either antisocial personality, narcissistic personality, histrionic personality, or borderline personality. So they usually have a cluster B personality disorder, which means that they're dramatic and erratic in their interpersonal relationships.
Okay, so that's something that we could track. We could say, okay, how dramatic? What are the shifts here?
Yeah.
Are they high up here and then they're really low? Which I know in the movie, if anyone who's seen your TikTok or your Instagram, they've seen kind of how you talk about some of the clips in the movie and what really happened. But there were definitely some really highs and really lows that you.
Yeah, and very dramatic and very erratic behavior. A lot of times they'll have a substance abuse disorder. Then they might have a mood disorder, either, major depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, which will exacerbate their personality disorder. A lot of times they have impulse control. They could have a process disorder, such as gambling or sex. And then combined with the cluster B, there's that term, the dark tetrad. And under the dark tetrad is narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and sadism. So they can have flavors of all of that. Or maybe they have more narcissism, meaning they're more self-absorbed and more into their image and really exploitation. Or they could have psychopathy where they're extraordinarily cold and callous and really can't attach. And then the Machiavellian piece is that they're highly manipulative. They're smooth operators, but they're planning strategically what they're going to do, meaning they'll lie to your face and say, no, I wasn't with that person. I was out with my worker. His wife is upset because they can't have a baby. Right. And then the sadism piece, which is the worst piece, is somebody who actually gets pleasure out of seeing only the people around them that they know feel harm. So I just named about 7 different layers, right?
Yeah.
Very complex personality profile. So again, you can see, if I have my master's and my doctorate and studied NARM and it took me 3 years to figure it out, okay, it's going to take a person a lot to understand this.
Yeah. Well, I had a couple questions, reading the book. I'm reading it going, okay, and still it took you 3 years, but he did have kind of a classic, maybe malignant, narcissistic,
Yes.
way of showing up. I'm wondering if you've ever seen where someone might have more of a covert narcissism or they're showing up and it might look different than what you experienced. Because,
Yeah.
someone might be hearing this and going, well, my partner isn't quite like that. He's not as the swings maybe aren't as big. I'm curious if you can describe what else that might look like if it's not sort of classic.
Yes, the grandiose narcissist is more agentic. They're more charming, more charismatic. And the covert or vulnerable narcissist, at the core of this personality is antagonism. They're highly hostile.
Okay.
So covert or vulnerable narcissist might be more subtle, more passive aggressive, and they have a lot more of a mood disorder. They feel a lot more shame.
Okay.
And so it'll definitely be subtler, but you'll still feel the hostility coming towards you. And this personality also is eternally the victim.
Right. Yeah, because I've heard that described where someone was like, "But my partner actually he's very insecure and he really needs me." And so the dynamic is a little different,
Yes.
and some of these same things that you're naming were happening, but they were kind of orienting to it differently. So that's why I appreciate you naming that it can look different.
Yeah, because they're more depressed and anxious
Mhm.
and more neurotic, as we would say, that
Mhm.
or expressing their neuroses
Yeah.
than the grandiose narcissist for sure. But the personality will always gaslight you, right? Deny your reality when you catch
Mhm.
them cheating or you catch them when their words don't match their actions. They'll be like, oh, you're overreacting. That's crazy. That didn't happen. And that makes you start to doubt yourself, right? Which is another way, then you're easier to control.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they'll blame you for it. You know, I'm cheating on you because you don't give me enough attention.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or another good trick that they'll do is this is a great little tip. They'll really accuse you of the very things they're always doing.
Yeah. Yeah, what is the phrase? Like, when they're accusing you, that's, like, actually their what's yeah, that's their narrative. That's actually what's happening from their perspective.
Admission, like if you're going away with your
Yeah.
girlfriends and they're like, you can't go because you're going to cheat on me. It's like, no, probably that means you're doing it and you think everybody's just like you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so say someone's starting to recognize these pieces. They're pointing out, like you said, they're being gaslit, but they're starting to see what's behind
Yeah.
that. The next sort of step you named is escaping. I mean, how does one even go about, moving in that direction if they're realizing this relationship is toxic for them and they're needing to get out?
Yeah. So the thing is that they need to, first of all, they need to know they're in it, right? To be able to escape it. And if they do plan on escaping or leaving the relationship, the biggest piece of advice that I give somebody is that you can never, ever, ever let them see you coming.
Mm,
You have to become very covert in how you leave because let's put it this way, they're really antagonistic, hostile people. And if they treated you poorly when you were with them, they're not going to be nice when you leave them.
mm,
And so, if the relationship was violent, you have to prepare for violence. I always give my patients when they do finally decide to tell somebody, and if they do have a substance abuse disorder, do not tell them when they're high.
mm.
If they're not sober, they're much more right, like they're not
Yeah.
inhibited. They'll just do anything, right? They're much more disinhibited.
Yeah, what resources would you point folks to as they're maybe in this planning phase and they're thinking, "Okay, I wanna be careful of when I decide to leave." Like, what are some things that maybe you could point them to do it in a safe way?
Yeah, so I mean, if they're getting divorced, you have to get really great legal counsel. And if you're married, you have to document everything because you just have to have everything documented, what's been happening, a timeline, and you have to be just really prepared for anything that can come your way. I would suggest you work with a therapist that's very trauma informed because it is a trauma bond. And if we define trauma as the experience of anything that's outside the realm of normalcy, this is a relationship that's outside the realm of a normal relationship. So you have to really get resourced emotionally, physically, financially, just in every way that you can, because you have to prepare for what they're going to do because it could be anything.
Mhm. And this sounds really relevant in terms of, well, you named it, the timing. It can take a while, and I know from what you describe in the book, like, you were can I use the word strategic? You were you were careful about when you made that decision and the timing.
Yeah, you have to be strategic. I always tell my patients, for me, I was lucky my ex-husband got arrested. So I knew I was safe because I knew he was the government's problem. And a lot of them don't have that
Mhm.
sort of situation where they're going to still have to deal with their partner. And I describe this in a book. There's a term called Darvo, which they use a lot after you leave, where if you start to accuse them of the things that they've done, they'll deny it. And actually what they'll do is they'll start to attack you and say, you're crazy. You're the one that did all this. You're an alcoholic. You're dangerous. You've been gaslighting me. And they do that to reverse the victim and offender, again, because they love to be the victim, now saying, no, I'm your victim. So Darbo is a mind game that they can really play afterwards that you need to get educated about, again, so you know how to deal with it. And then usually if you don't have kids, the ideal thing is to go no contact.
Okay. And that obviously is something that you've navigated. You do have children who are now grown, but at the time they were quite young.
They were very young. Yeah. Yeah. And again, it was easier for me to go no contact because my ex was dealing with the government and everything. But I was lucky in the sense that over time we were able to really be civil with each other and be good because of the kids. But I find that that's not usually the case, unfortunately, and the family court system is not very well educated about how this personality will show up in court. So that's why you really have to be super prepared. And if you are going to go to court, start the process right from the beginning.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? Because I've had a few of these terms that you're naming. I've had women say that they feel pathologizing toward them, like the term, we haven't talked about it, but reactive abuse. And even the term trauma bond. I've heard women say, well, but it wasn't me, like that's pathologizing to me. And I'm curious if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole reason I wrote my book. Because when I left my ex, they were like, he's an addict and you're codependent. And 5 years ago, I was like, I think there's something more going on here. This is a little deeper than that. But again, I had no words for it. And so the reason why I wrote my book is to destigmatize the experience that the woman usually is a woman, can be a man, goes through, because we're often told we're codependent, we're learned helplessness, we're a love addict, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And everyone can fall prey to a pathological person. Abuse never, or coercive control and abuse are never the fault of the victim. They're always the fault of the abuser.
Yeah.
And that's why in the middle of my book, I really break down the woman's personality so that she can understand her personality.
Yeah. I really appreciate you speaking to that. And I like this idea of like reclaiming this term isn't pathologizing to, well, and I apologize. That was a very heteronormative way of talking about it. It's often the woman, not always, often. And it's women that I'm speaking to that have said that it has felt pathologizing. I haven't spoken to any man who's in that situation, but.
Yes. And even therapists, well, I can't believe you left. But the research shows it takes a woman 4 to 7 times to leave a relationship like this, because it is a very complex, deep psychological process. And so in 2018, I read Sandra L. Brown's book, Women Who Love Psychopaths, turned all of my research on its head, because what she uses, the big 5 personality traits of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And what she discovered in her, I think, 20 years of research, that the women were not helpless. They were not codependent. They were actually scored very high in agreeableness and conscientiousness, which I score very high in. And agreeable women are loyal and tolerant and kind and pro-social individuals, and relationships are everything. And conscientious means you're determined, you're orderly, you have an integrity-oriented view towards life, which are not bad things. But in the hands of the wrong person, they get weaponized.
Yeah.
Right? You and I share those traits with you. You're going to cherish them.
Well, and I'm just thinking about how, and if I can just be open, this was my own experience.
Okay.
There were moments where I thought, I'm a strong person. I've been through some really hard things. This is just like, this isn't that bad. And I sort of gaslit myself around what was happening. Like, I've been through harder things. I'm really strong. He needs me to help him.
Makes you determined.
I can.
For training as a therapist. It's great. It's just not great when you're with a pathological person who's not going to change. And so when I read her research, I mean, it changed my view of this forever. And I'm forever grateful to her for that research. And now in my book, yes, there are women or men who have complex PTSD who do find themselves in these relationships. And there are people who have more dependent personality. And I break that down. So just so people can understand their personality traits. And even for therapists, it's very important for me because I assess all my patients. Okay, if this person has complex PTSD in general from their childhood and they've been in a trauma bond, the work is going to go a little slower than if it's a woman who's highly agreeable and highly conscientious. There's also a different treatment that needs to happen.
Can you speak to that? What do you see that needs to happen that's different?
Well, because when you're in a trauma bond, you do get complex PTSD. You do. You get all of the symptoms of complex PTSD because, again, you've been in a traumatic relationship that's been chronic.
Yeah.
So, right. So that's what you receive. But if you have a woman who has a deeper level of complex PTSD, and then you get another experience of complex PTSD, that work's going to be a lot more intricate. It's going to take longer for that woman to really trust me.
Okay.
And her level of symptoms probably will be more severe, the intrusive, the depressive, the avoidant, all the symptoms that we get from complex PTSD.
Yeah.
And to be more patient with them.
Okay. I appreciate you naming that.
Yeah. But that really is the whole reason why I wrote my book, is for everybody to get off of this, oh, ridiculous. She's staged. She's weak. She's dependent. She has learned helplessness. She's a love addict. She has a bad picker. It's like just pop psychology bullshit.
Okay.
Let's just spin it on its head. If you tell somebody you've been wounded and they love you, you would hope that they would want to help heal that.
Yeah. Can you speak to a bit how NARM has been a lens that you're looking through in doing this work?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, the beautiful thing about NARM is nobody gets pathologized.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, that's my true lens. And how NARM really helps me is that in my healing section, I use, and I quote Larry and Brad's book all the time, I use a lot of the NARM theory to help heal. Right. So bringing the body in, talking about emotional containment, teaching the people to really connect back to their authentic self. And these women have lost all control over their lives. And so really working with them in a way, because they have such a loss of self, to gain agency again. Connecting people to their authentic self so they can have, be an agent in their life. And so that's really the lens that I look through the healing. It's a very strength-based approach because, again, they've been stripped down. So I'm always working on ways to resource them.
What are some of the strengths that maybe get used? Like you said, they're very empathetic. They're very conscientious. So some of those strengths get used against them.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering how do you support them in connecting with those strengths again if they feel like I was empathic and it got used against me. I don't want to be empathic anymore.
So I specifically stay away from the agreeableness.
Okay.
It leans into agreeableness right now, right here, as you're trying to leave your partner, as if you need to deal with them because you have children. So I'll lean more into the other strengths that they have, which can usually be their conscientiousness. Some of them, it could be openness. Maybe they're very open to learning. Maybe they're very adaptive and flexible. Or they can be their extroversion. Maybe they're really good at going out in the world and meeting new people. So we'll figure out what strengths they do have, and then we'll really expand upon them. But leaving, if they are in the more agreeable category, acknowledging that, yes, you do have that, and that is a strength in all your other relationships, just not in this process of healing right here, unless you choose to be very compassionate toward yourself. and, and have empathy for yourself. Because again, and this is, NARM has really taught me about, swinging between pride and shame.
Yeah.
And these women are full of so much shame and so much self-blame. So I work with them. Like, if you're in shame, you're in your pattern,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to get you out of shame. And a great way to do that is through self-compassion.
What does that actually look like in your practice? How do you see women really connecting with self-compassion? Because I find a lot of folks feel like that, like, I know it up here in my head, but how does that actually drop down? How are you seeing that work for your patients?
Yeah. So first of all, I have to teach them about it. Most of them don't even understand self-compassion,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I teach them about, this is what self-compassion is. You're suffering. The world is suffering. You must speak to yourself as you would a best friend. Because if you've been living with an abuser who's been disparaging and insulting and undermining you, a lot of times you've internalized their words into your brain. So we have to really fight that inner critic. And we know the way to do that is with self-compassion. And so how are you speaking to yourself? Are you soothing yourself? Are you saying, I'm resourced, I'll get out of this? And Christopher Germer, who's Kristen Neff, really discovered
Mm-hmm.
this passion theory, talking to themselves in the mirror, like talking very soothing to themselves in the mirror, his research shows works.
Mm.
So really, and I have a self-compassion meditation too for free on my website that they can listen to repeatedly to build that muscle of self-compassion.
Mm. Okay, so you're working with, we followed the recognizing, escaping, and now you're talking about healing, and you're saying that the NARM framework is kind of the lens that you're looking through, especially because it's so non-pathologizing.
Yeah. So non-pathologizing. And of course, it's also too about mindfulness. And, after they've left, the first step is to stabilize them with self-care,
Mm.
right? Really checking in with their self-care, because a lot of times one of the avoidance strategies they want to use, and I've been there, is substances,
Mhm. Okay.
because they want to numb out with food, with alcohol, with, or they want to avoid life. So it's really stabilizing them through self-care, because they need to be stabilized to go on this whole healing journey. And it's hard,
Mm.
and everybody falls off, and like, oh, I ate donuts and I drank a bottle of wine, and I'm like, okay, today's another day.
Mm.
Right. And then
Mhm.
how else can we deal with your self-care? And we didn't talk about this, but I just want to touch on it, is that when they leave, because the man has two masks, they have severe cognitive dissonance,
Mhm.
meaning that mental struggle, like internally, is he good? Is he bad? Am I good or bad? Is the relationship good or bad? And so after they leave, they got a lot of positive flashbacks of the love bombing stage,
Yeah.
right? Which can make it's a real atypical trauma symptom of a trauma bond, which can make it super hard,
Mhm.
And people are like, you're not over him already. But positive intrusive flashbacks of the love bombing stage are really a common symptom.
Okay, talk about that, because I don't think most of us, when we think of kind of a traumatic flashback, we don't
Yeah.
think of like it being a positive memory. We often think of, oh, the horrific car accident or something flashback.
Yeah.
But you're speaking to a positive flashback where they were love bombing and how good that felt.
Yes. Yeah. And so they fear the positive flashback, because
Mhm.
we know a flashback is something that overwhelms us, that we have no control over, that comes out of the blue because we're
Yeah.
triggered. But they fear the positive flashback because it creates the longing, because it creates the cognitive dissonance and the confusion.
Yeah.
So it can also make them avoid life too.
Mm.
So it's hard. They can have flashbacks of the positive events, replays of the love bombing, avoiding people's places and things that are reminders of positive flashbacks, intrusive, unrelenting thoughts of positive flashbacks. And so what I have to tell them, and this is a very hard thing to share, and I always say to them, I'm going to warn you, this is going to sound really harsh, what I'm going to say. The love bombing and the kindness was also a manipulation.
Mhm.
So they're not really two separate people. And so we have to integrate that pathological person into one person.
Can I say what comes up for me when you say that and thinking of the kind of the harshness? I'm thinking from, a perspective of, well, does that mean I wasn't worthy of that kind of care and love, right? And to think, well, I wasn't worthy of it then with them, so why do I deserve anything better? It's sort of a spiral down.
No, no, and that's why I say it so
Mhm.
sensitively. But
Mhm.
the work in the healing is to really get them to understand that the kindness and the manipulation or the love bombing was manipulative. And of course, it does, bring them into I'm not worthy. But, I love always what Norm taught me is that it's not always about self love, it's about self acceptance.
Mhm.
And if I can work with them on starting to really find the good qualities, find the strengths, be self compassionate, and work towards self acceptance while I'm teaching them,
Yeah.
that this unfortunately was all a manipulation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Can I share what came up with me as I was reading your book and moving to the end and we're in this healing section?
Okay.
I kept thinking to myself, it's not even because it wasn't like I was reading in your words that you were like, Nadine, I love myself. It wasn't necessarily that. It was like a vibe of like you loved being yourself. Like you love the unfolding of who you are. And that to me feels more accessible, and I'm not saying that you were saying that you tell clients that they should love themselves, but that's what I feel like you've modeled, and I know that you've had a lot of patients who have come to you because they know your story. I know we talked about that in our last episode. They know that you've been through it, and
Yes.
you've modeled really this way of loving being who you are, which I think feels so much more accessible
Yes.
than you've gotta love yourself. You've gotta do better. You've gotta treat yourself better. You know what I mean?
Right, 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 right. Love being where you are in that moment because we're always becoming.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, we're always becoming, and we know healing isn't like, oh, yeah, you just heal. I mean,
Linear, yeah.
it's for 5 steps back, right?
Mhm.
So, also sharing with them that knowledge that it is a long journey and it really is a 2-year process of healing after this.
Mm. Is that what you notice? It takes clients, you take them through kind of a 2-year journey of reconnecting?
Things,
Oh, that's
yeah,
beautiful.
I think after a year, there's more stabilization and more because you have to remember you're just been living really in a trauma vortex with somebody.
Mhm.
So yeah, I do think it's a 2-year training. I mean, 2-year training, a 2-year journey.
Kinda.
I mean, for me, it's been a lifelong, but I think at least if I say 2 years to them,
Yeah.
you know, gives them more hope because they do feel so much hopelessness.
Yeah.
We're finding love again
Yeah.
and fully recovering it, but it is possible.
Well, and for me, I'm thinking about so many folks who out there they've heard, they get 12 sessions with their insurance company. And
Yeah.
a lot I know we can roll our eyes about that, how ridiculous that is because, many of the guests that we've had on the conversation I had with Jonathan Shedler where he talks about how intensive this can be. This isn't just 12 sessions or 6 sessions and you're done. This has got to be a real in-depth exploration. And when we can be honest with them, they have to understand this is really deep work. And if they commit to that, if they're consenting to that, it's actually more hopeful, I think, because they're like, okay, she's being straight with me. She's being honest with me. This is going to be
Yeah.
2 years. The time's going to pass anyway.
The time's going to pass anyway, and it wasn't a 10-day walk in.
Mhm.
You know, it's not going to be a 10-day walk out. And the work is, I always say that I'm in the emotional emergency room with them. It's like emotional triage work,
Mhm.
right? So they have access to me via text, via email, initially, especially for the first 3 months,
Oh,
because
wow.
I'm going to be collaborating in it with them. And that's
Mm.
another way Norm has really taught me so much. But, I'm not above them, even though I know more. Like we're really in the shit together.
Yeah.
We're going to try to figure it out together, whatever that takes.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you use the word collaboration because that's the feeling. They know their life better than we do. even though we have training and all of that, but we're really in collaboration with their process. I love that.
Yeah, and facilitating their process, right? That it is their process, Afterwards, they'll be like, "Oh my God, you helped me so much." It's like, no, you did it.
Mhm.
You did it.
Yeah.
Facilitating your process, but they are the ones that do it, and they are unbelievable. I mean, single women who've left their pathological person after a week with a baby.
It's amazing.
Women who go up in court and fight, these judges for their kids every single day. And there's just so much level of bravery
Yeah.
that I see. As painful as our work can be, it's also hopeful.
Yeah. I just got chills as you said that. Yeah. Hearing the strength, like we said earlier, sometimes their strength is, well, I'll speak for myself. I think sometimes my strength is what kind of kept me in it in some ways, because I kept thinking
Yes.
I can get through this kind of thing. But also when you're ready for an exit and you've prepared yourself, that strength really can carry through. And you just named that's so beautiful that you get to witness that.
Yeah, I do. I really, really, really do. And people say to me, "Oh my God, how do you deal with that all day long?" And I'm like, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when you know you're doing
Yeah,
what you were meant to do in this life. I love
yeah,
it.
I love it.
I
I
love
love
it.
seeing them. Yeah, get through things that they didn't know that they could.
Yeah. Well, Nadine, is there anything as we kind of start to wrap up our time, is there anything else that you feel our listeners should know about your experience, anything that you've learned in the process of even just the last 2 years of deepening in this book?
Yeah, I mean, we really touched upon everything that is pertinent. I think that a lot of people really fear falling in love again. I know I did. I was like, no way, no way. But I hate to use toxic positivity because it drives me crazy. But really, you can, if you want to learn from this, learn about yourself, become more of who you are. And that is a way to make meaning out of it. And that doesn't dismiss the pain and the horrible suffering. But life is full of suffering, unfortunately, you know.
Yeah.
But there is hope on the other side. And I'm proof of it. You're proof of it.
Mhm.
It's like going to the gym a lot of times. You never want to go, but you feel better
Yeah.
afterwards. So
Yeah.
show up for your therapy, learn about it, and you'll reach your potential in love one day. Because I'm
Yeah.
married 24 years
I
now.
love that. And I wanted to comment on that, how beautiful it is to witness. And I know from a distance and even just on social media, but observing the real partnership that it's so clear that you have built with your husband. Remind me his name.
John.
John.
Yeah.
Yeah. The real partnership and how you clearly support each other and that you've alchemized this really traumatic experience that you had and it's guided you to the work that you're doing to help others in the world. And that's just so, I mean, that's as good as it gets, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So, after a trauma bond, love is possible. Not that our relationship is perfect at all, but it's real and it's messy
It's
and it's
real.
it's healthy.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you again for coming back. This has been really fun to have this conversation. And I appreciate you naming, again, some of those pieces that I've talked to women about, even just the pathologizing that has happened in this space, and that you're kind of reclaiming these terms and showing women where their power is, and anyone, not just women, but anyone who's been in this kind of relationship.
Yeah. Anybody who's been in it, and that I think is really, I just, women DM me from all over the world just saying thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for validating my experience and
Mhm.
not making me feel crazy.
Mhm. Yeah.
So there we go.
Yeah. So folks can find your book, Run Like Hell, A Therapist's Guide to Recognizing, Escaping, and Healing from Trauma Bonds. Tell us where else they can find you and be in contact with your work.
Yeah, so they can see me on Instagram, The Real Dr. Nadine, and I am on TikTok, the Wild West of social media, at Dr. Nay, NAELMFT.
Okay.
And my website,
Awesome.
drnay.com, where I have tons of free resources and tons of assessments.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you again. I'm excited to just continue witnessing all of that you're doing in the world and appreciate all that you're bringing.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more information about our guest, check the show notes or visit us at complextraumatrainingcenter.com/transforming trauma. You can also connect with us in other ways. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. If you're a licensed mental health professional working with complex trauma and are interested in learning the neuroaffective relational model, we're excited to share with you about our upcoming NARM therapist trainings. The Level 2 training is a clinical training where you will get trained in a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach for resolving the long-term impacts of ACEs and CPTSD. As you learn and integrate NARM, you will receive individualized support and join an engaged professional community of therapists passionate about healing complex trauma. Learn more about this training and reserve your spot by visiting www.complextraumatrainingcenter.com. The Complex Trauma Training Center emphasizes professional development in support of personal growth. We provide clinical trainings, online webinars, ongoing consult groups, mentorship programs, and community events. Our mission is to provide a relational, inclusive, and depth-oriented professional community for those seeking a supportive network of therapists working with complex trauma. To learn more about our trainings, programs, and events, please visit us on our website at complextraumatrainingcenter.com. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Elisa Sponseller for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.